Well, Pastor Wilson, I'm really appreciative of your time. And obviously, a lot has gone on in the past couple days that I think will make the topic of our conversation all the more pointed, heartfelt, relevant.
Right.
Um, so I'm more than happy to just dig into the historical piece to all of this. But um, I wanted to ask you, as someone who has had the chance of directly interacting with Charlie Kirk, um, and in light of everything that's happened, just and at a very personal level, I think myself and a lot of people are just kind of reeling, kind of shocked, not really sure how to feel, not sure what's the Christian response, where do we go from here, etc. I think there's a lot of questions, so I feel really honored to be able to come before a pastor and hopefully glean some things that will help not only myself personally but anyone else listening to this. So I know that's wide open, but welcome, thank you, and anything that you think is of value, I am all ears for it.
So yeah, let's start with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mentioned in a blog post that I just had dinner with him a few weeks ago.
Wow.
He is um, the same man. When he's on or he's in a public event, he's a certain way, and in a private dinner event, which is where I was with him, he's the same man. He's not he's not a showman in the sense of he's one way in public and then another way in private. It was quick, lively, full of questions. We talked about presuppositional apologetics because he is basically a campus evangelist with politics mixed in.
Hmm.
He was very much an evangelist and very much someone who communicated the truths of Christianity to a lot of young people. And he was very interested in presuppositional apologetics, had questions about that. There was a guy with us at dinner who was a member of another school of thought, and we had a discussion about it. He was all about ideas, right? And what a lot of people don't realize is that in the spectrum of conservative, politically engaged Christians on the right, Charlie Kirk was a moderate, right? He was not the extremist of extremists. He was a moderate. He was doing exactly what we should want people in an orderly society to do, which is let's talk about it. Let's exchange ideas. You ask me questions, I'll ask you questions. Let's talk about it. And he was good at it. And he was so good at it that he was influencing a lot of people. And so he was shot. Now, there are two things that are important to note here. We don't, on the right, conservatives have resisted identity politics, meaning that you can't say, I heard a rumor about the shooter's motivations, and we will hang him on that basis. They've got the guy in custody now. They've got a suspect in custody who should go into a trial with the presumption of innocence, and he should get a fair trial. It shouldn't take 10 years, but he should get a fair trial and a straight up the middle trial. And Christians should behave in such a way as to indicate that they want him to have a fair trial. You don't want to execute the wrong guy. You don't want to participate in any kind of lynch mob mentality. Right. So that's one thing. So he's innocent until proven guilty. But when I said in my blog post that this was a political murder and it should be treated politically, you can see the necessity of doing that from the reaction on the left, right? So if let's say as the indications are that he is an Antifa guy, that he is a leftist, and that what everybody guessed is probably true, but we've not confirmed all that yet. But what we do know is that after Charlie Kirk was killed, the left online erupted in jubilation,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And this means that this is a political assassination, unlike all modern political assassinations that I'm aware of. We've had assassinations before, but generally you're talking about assassinations of presidents or people with considerable power and influence. But Charlie Kirk was not a billionaire. Charlie Kirk was not one of the tech lords. Charlie
Mm-hmm.
Kirk did not hold office. He was simply a campus debater, evangelist,
Mm-hmm.
and he was effective. And he was so effective that the entire left began rejoicing at the news of his murder. And so this is unlike any other assassination that I'm aware of. On top of that, it was unlike any other assassination in the reaction that I've seen in the conservative Christian community.
Mm-hmm.
This seemed personal.
Yeah.
And it seemed personal because it was personal. Because Charlie Kirk was killed for doing things that we're doing right now. We're talking about our faith in public. That's what we're doing.
Right.
And so consequently, when people say, that could have been me, that could have been my kid, that who is safe in such a climate? Those are preeminently reasonable questions. And so consequently, it's not really a moment for us to join hands across the aisle and say we're all saying the same thing, really, because we're really not.
Yeah, I think that it's very clear that there's some type of a tonal shift that is happening right now in the wake of this. And I don't know exactly what your thoughts about this would be, but I've been trying to understand it all day long, basically, because I have seen exactly what you're describing, where you have the people literally laughing on his grave, literally spitting on his grave. I mean, just mocking and jeering in the nastiest way imaginable. And at the same time, I feel like I've seen some examples that are a little bit better than that. Like I think if Joe Rogan had a much more human response, even shockingly, Bernie Sanders had a much more human response to it, like acknowledging
Mm-hmm.
that it is a really tragic thing, and any other response is like you need to go to a psychologist if you think it's funny
Mm-hmm.
when a person is publicly um murdered for talking. So
Right.
I from a Christian perspective, for all the Christians who definitely feel the sense of pain, loss, anger. I listened to Matt Walsh, and he was kind of communicating in a more I don't even know exactly how to say it, but there was some edge to what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
What like practically speaking, what would you define as a bad response and a good response to this cultural moment?
Yeah. Let me make one comment about the reasonable people on the left first,
Yes,
and then
please. Yeah.
go on to that. There are some leaders, politicians, who have responded, we condemn this, this is senseless and tragic. And
Mm-hmm.
they can be, I would divide them into one or two categories. They are either people that still have a functional conscience. They've got remnants of the old school liberalism
Mm-hmm.
before wokeism took over the left. So they still have a functional memory of what it would be like. And so those sorts of things should be taken at face value. Then you have leftist leaders who condemn this because they're not morons.
Mm-hmm.
They know that this is a disaster for the left. Okay, they can see that somebody misjudged the moment. They they created a martyr on the right, which the right has not had. Right? The left has had Martin Luther King, and they've made the most of it. And this is a spontaneous eruption from all across the conservative spectrum. And the response that was sort of instantaneous, Medal of Freedom, Air Force Two picking up his body and taking it back to Phoenix. So there are intelligent leaders on the left who are thinking to themselves, even if they privately celebrated this, they know that this is not whooping and dancing on his grave is the quickest way to destroy the left. Right? So, and there are people who know that, and I think are trying to get their foot on the brake. So that's the thing there. Now, your question had to do with how Christians should respond to this, and I believe that our response should be thoroughgoing. Right. In other words, this is you cannot call conservatives if you want a balanced budget and you get called a Nazi, or if you want people to be hired without regard to, you want people to be judged on the content of their character and not the color of their skin, just straight out of Martin Luther King's speech, and you get called a racist, degenerate, a deplorable. That rhetoric has sort of irritated many on the right, and now there's this provocation, this flashpoint, and there's a temptation to go up in a sheet of flame. Okay, and my objection to the sheet of flame response, or the see red response, where you go on a rampage and then a week later you ask your family, what did I do? Well, whatever it was you did, you weren't thinking. And so what I want us to do is I want us to respond as forcefully and as consistently and as rigorously as we can. And I want us to keep our heads while we're doing it. Right. So my dad, back in the 60s, my dad wrote a book called Principles of War, and he applied the principles of military warfare to strategic evangelism. And these are Sun Tzu, Clausewitz principles: mobility, surprise, concentration, economy of force, those principles of war. And the principle of war that is pertinent right now, the one that is most pertinent right now, is pursuit. Okay? Pursuit is when you win a great victory, and the temptation for the victorious army, the temptation for the victorious side, is to take the victory and rest. Okay? The Civil War could have been over at the Battle of Gettysburg if the Union forces had pursued. Okay? But they didn't. They fought a hard 3-day battle. They won the battle, held the field, and didn't pursue. And the war continued for 2 more years. Okay? This situation, for however it came about, has been a gross strategic blunder by the left. And Christians, conservative Christians, after the shock has worn off, let's say a month from now, it will be awfully easy for all of us to go back to our factory settings, and those factory settings are basically peace-loving, go along, get along. We don't want to be at war with our fellow citizens. We don't want to be daggers drawn all the time. But we are at a point where I believe we must pursue, and we must pursue in such a way as to make any politician, any elected official that wears a T-shirt with this assassin's picture on it, celebrating that politician needs to be absolutely unelectable. Right? Where where there is such a fierce denunciation of this mode of it's not, you can't call it discourse, this reaction to discourse, uh,
Mhm.
where we are just flat out hostile to this whole thing. And so, such that we don't apologize when, when, let's say, a teacher who's whooping it up and celebrating Charlie Kirk's murder, and that teacher is fired. That's not cancel culture. Okay. We don't want the fourth grade teacher celebrating murder.
Mm.
All right. If she said, if the fourth grade teacher said, I think we ought to expand welfare benefits, yeah, you don't fire her over, a left of center position like that. Or I think the minimum wage needs to be higher. No, don't fire people over opinions. But this is not an opinion. This is celebrating murder. And you
Well,
go ahead.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just what I keep thinking about is the belief. Now it's a wrong belief, but how did how did this idea get into the shooter's head where he's carving into the casing, "Hey, fascist, catch." I think that's the same belief that the teachers who were getting fired and all the people, sort of
Mm-hmm.
the mob that I'm seeing manifest on TikTok or whatever. I think it's actually a belief that he really was this terrible person, that he really deserved it, that he has got it, he had it coming. I've heard so much of you reap what you sow and all that type of thing. And what I'm interested in is when you're talking about this war, metaphor
Mm-hmm.
of we are in a cosmic battle. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. What I'm interested in is how do we combat that reality that somehow through a propaganda machine or through whatever version of indoctrination, somehow a person gets this idea that it's a moral action to do what this guy did a couple days ago. He's so bad, and my worldview is so debased that I actually feel that I am on the right side of history and that I'm taking a moral action by doing this thing. How do we make that clear?
Right. The rot that there's a particular kind of rot that makes that case seem plausible to many people, and the rot is relativism, subjectivism. What is king in this person's system is a person's feelings. I feel like he's a Nazi. I feel like he wants me dead. Okay. Well, the way we measure whether someone wants someone else dead is by who shoots whom. Right. This is not, I spoke a number of years ago. I spoke at Bloomington, the university in Bloomington, and there was a mob there, and there's a documentary made out of it called Free Speech Apocalypse. And a bunch of the students who are going to be protesting earlier in the day were using makeup to put bruises on their body. Okay. And they were putting bruises on their body because of what my hurtful words were doing to them. But I wasn't doing anything to them. I didn't do anything hurtful to them. So they had to say, in my own head, you have done and said these hurtful things, and so I'm going to paint a bruise on myself, put a bruise on myself, and then accuse you of having done it, and then I'm going to retaliate against you for the evil thing that you did. And this is like the old joke about a wife being mad at her husband because he cheated on her in her dream. Um, but he didn't cheat on her. So the issue is who is the actual Nazi? Who is the actual fascist? Because most conservative Christians celebrate the courage of Bonhoeffer. Okay. And Bonhoeffer was hanged by the Nazis because of his involvement in a plot to kill Hitler. Okay. But Hitler actually was Hitler. All right. So when we say Hitler is literally Hitler, well, Hitler really was literally Hitler. Trump is not literally Hitler. And so what matters is sort of the facts on the ground. What is the actual case? What is the actual state of affairs? So when Trump is trying to reduce the size and scope of government, that's not something that fascists do. One time years ago, we had a good conservative congresswoman, and she was going to give a news conference here in Moscow. And I went over to hear her at the news conference, and she was running late, and there were protesters there. And across the room, there was a young college student with a sign that said, "Down with fascism." And we had time to kill, and there was no congressman there. So I went over and stood next to him, and I leaned over and said, What is fascism? Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he finally came up with when the government does bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in other words, he did not know what fascism was. He was just repeating talking points, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to say that Charlie Kirk, I shot him because he wanted me dead, it's a lie. It's false. He didn't. Charlie Kirk made his ministry out of, hey, let's talk, let's converse, let's have a conversation. That's what he objectively did, and that it can be proven and shown that that's what he did. And when someone says, yes, but the way I felt was he was threatening me, and I say, but your feelings are irrelevant. And
or I mean, or even if he said some things that were actually wrong, like let's just say that theoretically, imagine there's a person that says a few ideas that are actually wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually change anything. That's what's so shocking to me is I've been making a decent amount of content since this happened, just trying to pull back a little bit and almost do more of like a meta commentary on, like, it actually doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you agree with everything that somebody says at a fundamental level. Words are not violence. Violence is violence. Words are not violence. Words can incite violence, and then when that violence is incited, then you actually deal with that as its own thing. But literally talking, I don't understand how anybody can justify what has happened to someone for literally just talking.
Right. And but it goes the other way too. So when the left says your words are violence, these are the same people who will say that when they burned down Minneapolis after George Floyd, they would say that was free speech. So actual violence is dismissed by them as being freedom of expression or venting their anger, justified somehow. And then words that are not violent at all are registered as violence, down to the microaggressions. So the left has got it so fine-tuned that if you use a word that's just half a bubble off, they accuse you of a racist microaggression or misogynistic microaggression. And then you have a murder like this occur on camera, and people openly defend it. That's just called hypocrisy. That's biblical hypocrisy.
Is it one thing I've been wrestling with is it a mistake at this point to talk about things in terms of left and right, or do you still think that that's a helpful way of talking about it? And I guess just to put one other layer behind that question is, I tend toward the idea of, let the kindness of the Lord lead them to repentance. Maybe it's just my personality, maybe it's my denomination, whatever, but I kind of tend to believe, kill them with kindness, take the moral high ground, be loving, a soft answer turns away anger, et cetera, et cetera. And yet when I see this type of thing, it's like, is there something flawed about that? Do we need to call a spade more directly? Are we being like too passive, too nice, too jellyfish? Like how do we help people see the error of their thinking in a way that is still truly Christ-like? Is, I guess, right, the question that I'm wrestling with.
So the whoever I trust that this is going to result in a number of Charlie Kirks being raised up to speak on college campuses and do that. I don't think Ben Shapiro and Tim Pool can do it because they're not Christians. The person or persons who take Charlie Kirk's place will have to be outspoken Christians, and they are going to have to go out there and be exactly the way Charlie Kirk was, kind, open to discussion. So we don't we don't return evil for evil. You don't defeat the abyss by throwing yourself into it. That's true. But, and this is important, we have to realize that Romans 12 and Romans 13 didn't have that division in the original letter. It's all part of one letter. And if you read in Romans 12, there's a section there near the end where the Apostle Paul sounds very Sermon on the Mounty, right? It's just, bless those who persecute you. You heap coals of fire on their head. It's very much in the vein of the Lord's Sermon on the Mount. Okay. And do not take vengeance, because vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Okay. But notice it doesn't say vengeance is wrong. It says vengeance is mine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. God says vengeance is mine. So we're told to leave room for God's vengeance. And then in Romans 13, it says the civil magistrate, the authorities that exist, are God's deacon, a deacon of wrath. Okay, to punish the wrongdoer and to reward the righteous. So I would be utterly against Christian vigilante groups going around hunting communists. That would be the kind of disobedience of Romans 12 that I think is just out of court. But I do believe we should leave room for God's wrath, because vengeance is mine. And then God has designated the civil magistrate and given him the sword in order to execute God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And so consequently, if they seek the death penalty in this case, and if he receives a fair trial and is convicted, he needs to be executed. Okay, I would support his execution, and would support the prison chaplain going to visit him before the execution to offer him the grace of the gospel, right? He's not beyond salvation, but he still needs to die. Right? Why? Because of Romans 12, Romans 13. He needs to die not because we took justice into our own hands, but because the magistrate is doing what God called him to do. Now, here's the tipping point, or the dangerous element in this. In the immediate case, the task of law enforcement is to protect the average citizen. Right? The immediate case is protect the citizen from the criminal. Okay, but we need to zoom out. If we zoom out, we see that in the larger scope of things, the role of law enforcement is to protect the criminal from the public. Okay, because in that poor girl on transit that was murdered by the guy who'd been released 14 times, the task of law enforcement, and that includes the judge, some politician got on and said, we need to step up our policing. And someone with the police force said, what do you mean policing? We arrested him 14 times. And it was the judicial system that kept letting him go. We don't need more policing. We need justice in the courts. Well, in that instance, the law enforcement and the judicial system did not protect that poor woman. Okay. And their immediate task is to protect that woman. But if you have cases of notoriety, and that Ukrainian thing and Charlie Kirk's murder are two notorious murders that have just hit the public now. At some point, there's one of those things, and we may already be there, will be proved to be a flashpoint. And that flashpoint, when the public goes up in a sheet of flame, that's how you get militias. That's how you get lynch mobs. That's how you get people who are going to be absolutely savage with criminal classes. Okay. Now, I'm not saying this because I'm defending that savagery. I'm not defending it at all. I've been warning against it for years and years and years. If it says in Ecclesiastes 8:11, where justice is not speedily executed upon the criminal, there the heart of man is filled to do evil. And it's not just the encouragement of the next criminal. It is the the heart of man is filled to do evil in the vigilante rough justice that explodes. And as Kurt Schlichter says to the liberals, you're not going to like the new rules. The way they've been running this, they've been provoking and provoking and provoking the public. And when it finally explodes and militias are dropping communists out of helicopters, without any trial, and you have sort of a state of reactionary violence.
Mm-hmm.
The liberal, I'd say, yeah, it's not good to be part of those lynch mobs. I don't want to be reactionary like that. I want to follow Christ no matter what. But I also want to say the people primarily responsible for that were the lax judges, prosecutors who participated in this system of anarcho-tyranny. And anarcho-tyranny is where, in the UK, for example, they're almost a perfect specimen of it, where you can be running a Pakistani grooming gang to rape little British girls on the one hand, and it's glossed over. We don't want to be racist. That people keep getting released, but you get arrested for posting something on Facebook that's critical of the UK's immigration policy, right? So the tyranny is aimed at the law-abiding, and the anarchy is offered to the lawless. That condition of anarcho-tyranny is simply asking for civil war and repressive reactionary violence. And the people who are running the show up to this point are the ones responsible.
That is helpful. I was watching a video of yours earlier today, and you said something along the lines of, if there is no God, then there are no God-given rights, just ever-changing, I forgot exactly how you put it, ever-changing privileges. That's what you said. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because that really struck a chord for me in terms of kind of what you were saying earlier about how this is all basically what you get when you have moral relativism.
Yes. So the Declaration of Independence, which I take to be not just a historical document, but a covenantal one, I believe that it's still binding, in other words. The Declaration of Independence said that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Now, I have rights because I'm a creature, because someone made me. And my Creator is the one who gave me these rights. He expects me to respect the image of God in others, expect me to respect the image of God in you and everyone else I meet. I have rights because I am created in the image of God, and I'm to respect everyone else who's created in the image of God. But if there is no Creator, and I'm simply the end product of so many years of evolution, then all I am is meat, bones, and protoplasm. And I don't have any rights at all because there's no Creator to endow me with rights. So what I have instead would be privileges that are granted to me from the powers that be. And not only do I have these privileges, but they are rapidly diminishing privileges. I have fewer of them than I used to. And this is because if there is no God here above the state, take God away. If there is no God above the state is promoted. The state is God. Okay? So if there is no God above the state, then the state is God. And if the state is God, then they're in charge of what I get to do, say, or think.
They're the highest authority.
They're the highest authority in the lives of those governed. So the only way you can have rights that are not dependent upon Congress or the courts is if there is a God above the state. But as soon as you say there must be a God above the state, there must be a transcendent grounding for our rights, you are in Christian nationalism territory. Okay? Because someone's going to say, okay, fine, which God? And I would say the true one.
Right. There is only one God. That's a whole other conversation about like religious pluralism. And if you really look at the claims of different religions, like they obviously are not just different shades of gray, but they're different descriptions of different beings who are not all true at the same time and in the same sense. So
Right.
If we're talking about the God of Christianity, we're talking about the God of Genesis and the God who gave people those inalienable
Right.
rights. Which I guess I'm bringing it there just because I'm sitting here and I'm feeling a burden. Is really what it is. I'm feeling a burden as a Christian person who also has some kind of a platform or whatever that means. And I'm
Mhm.
kind of scratching my head in terms of how do we either A, undo this, B, move forward in some way that's different than how things have been, or do you just see it as this is a natural part of the process of how ultimately the kingdom of heaven moves forward and ultimately things get better? Is this just like a necessary, not a necessary plot point, but is this ultimately all moving in a good direction? Or I'm not saying the question perfect, but I guess essentially I'm putting myself in the shoes of anyone listening to this, just going, geez, is this what the world is really like? Is this the country that we really live in? Is this how things really are? How did we get here? And how do we fix this? Because this is awful, is basically what I'm feeling.
Yes. So I would argue that given our position in history, the only way out for America in the beginning of the 21st century, the only way out is through. Okay. I don't think we can do what we've been doing. So um, basically the illustration I've used for years is that, well, I forget who it was, that we have two parties in Washington. We have the evil party and the stupid party. All right. And the evil party wants to drive us toward the cliff edge of the abyss, and they want to go at 85 miles an hour. The stupid party wants to compromise and drive 50 toward the abyss. Someone once joked that if the Democrats introduced a measure to burn down the Capitol, the Republicans would counter with a measure to do it over the course of 3 years.
Yeah. That's
What we need to do is go in a different direction,
yeah.
and that means we have to repudiate the whole project. So the entire post World War II liberal democratic consensus is secularist and idolatrous, and it must go. Right? We have to say this isn't working. They've told us that it's progress. This is, we're progressing from our previous superstitions and up into secular liberal enlightenment. And I'd say, well, how much more enlightenment are we going to be able to stand after all this enlightenment? You don't know what a woman is. You don't know what a man is. How much more enlightenment are we going to have to put up with? So my take on politics is that secularism is a failed god.
Hmm.
Secularism is a failed project. It has collapsed. It doesn't have any rationale anymore.
Hmm.
They don't have the theological, philosophical, or political throw weight intellectually to be able
Mm-hmm.
to defend themselves or even articulate what they're about. Um,
Yeah.
it's gone. It's face down. Face down, drunk in the gutter. And so consequently, if we want to govern ourselves in a way that uh, protects life, honors human dignity, and that sort of thing, we're going to need a transcendental footing for it.
Yeah, that's I think that's perfectly stated. And in fact, even at the height of whatever that project was, the best that it ever did was borrow certain elements from God and then use them against God. But it never really generated anything original in the first place, from where I
Right.
sit.
And I express that by saying the prodigal son didn't run out of money the first weekend.
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah.
so he was able to throw quite a few parties with his father's money. Uh, the secular establishment had a lot of inherited moral capital from
Yeah.
2,000 years of Christian civilization. And it took a while before the checks started to bounce, but they're bouncing now.
So how do we? I don't know if this question is even going to make sense, but how do we help someone see God, basically see his relevancy, see his beauty, not some, because I just think that people are so like they have connotations that they don't like. they're thinking of some bad experience that they had in 6th grade, and they feel like, I'm over that, I'm educated past that, I'm done with that, whatever. I was traumatized by the skirts or whatever it is, and they feel like that was something associated with childhood. But now we're in a moment. I will say this: some silver lining is I've seen certain people saying, "Hey, I haven't been to church in a decade, but I feel like I need to go to church this weekend." I've seen enough of that comments. There's even a popular, I forgot his name off the top of my head, but he has a pretty big, I think, a 700,000 person Twitter account. He's an author and a comic, and he basically was just open to he just said, "Hey, does anybody have any Christian book recommendations?" And people were recommending The Great Divorce and Chesterton and different things. And he's like, "Thanks so much. I'm going to put out some content around that." So I was like, that's a good sign, that
Yeah.
people are kind of pausing to say, should we reconsider God? But
So
how do go? Yeah. So go.
here's how we do it. I think this is what we need to do is look at the Charlie Kirk phenomenon and zoom out and look at the whole thing, because it wasn't Charlie Kirk sitting at his table debating with an angry tranny or an angry lesbian or some. You've seen those are the clips, but zoom out and look at the crowd, the impact. Charlie Kirk was having a huge impact on the crowd, the people who weren't talking, right? The
Mm-hmm.
people who go to class and they are fed the nihilistic, atheistic, Nietzschean nonsense, and it's just not satisfying anything in their soul, and they feel like they're living in society in free fall, and they go to hear Charlie Kirk, and they say nothing, they don't do anything, and then someone who's like a devotee of what they're teaching at the college comes to the microphone, and there's an angry exchange with Charlie Kirk, and we can say, well, see, Charlie Kirk didn't persuade that person. No, but I think he persuaded 100 people watching,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that's why I think that's why I think this is such a massive um, uh, such a massive moment. So, for example, I'm a pastor of a good sized church. Last night we had a psalm sing and prayer vigil at our church, and and we put it out announced it the day of, and I was astonished at how many people came. Um, we were expecting a good turnout, but I've never seen anything like it, and it was like I'm a pastor that I think has a pretty good thumb on the pulse of where my people are, but I had no idea how many people were directly affected by this. Whether the kids are watching Charlie Kirk or whatever, he was having an impact. And I believe that when we pursue, I mentioned pursuit earlier, that pursuit means continuing to talk to those people who are tenderhearted, continuing to talk to those people who have been softened, and many of them softened even more by these events.
Mm-hmm.
The people who are dancing on Charlie's grave, they're hardened, okay? But I think it's only a tiny minority of people who have hardened themselves to that extent. I think for most people, this is a teachable moment. This is a moment where America is all ears.
That's a really hopeful perspective, and I love that, because you know how the algorithm works, where once you're down a certain path, you can kind of just start to think, man, is this everybody? And because I was being investigative, I think I took too many steps down that path of just seeing a lot of dancing on his grave and just feeling like, man, people are just so far gone, so lost. So I appreciate that hope-filled perspective. One other quote I wanted to bring in here, because I think it directly ties in, is G.K. Chesterton, who I mentioned a second ago. But he says, when men choose not to believe in God, they do not thereafter believe in nothing. They then become capable of believing in anything. And to me, that directly puts the pin on the donkey's tail in terms of the danger of just, well, what's the next thing? It's an ever-changing landscape of values. What's the next thing going to be, and what's going to stop anybody from doing what they want,
Right.
fundamentally?
That's right.
What else should we add to this? I know your time is I know you have a hard out in, what is it, 7
But
minutes?
yeah, about 11 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, is there anything you wanna tie in terms of the NatCon content that you had, or just, I don't know, I guess closing thoughts? I wanna let you get in everything that you wanted to here.
Yeah. Uh, at the NatCon conference, which was a conference of Protestants, Roman Catholics, and Jews largely. So people who are part of the um, uh, I don't know what to call it anymore. Not the dissident right, but not the traditional right. Okay, a number of people associated with the Trump administration. Tulsi Gabbard spoke there. Sebastian Gorka spoke there. Um, Senator Hawley spoke. It was that kind of conference. I spoke on America's Christian Protestant roots. Okay. And I said, of course, we have a situation now where there are more people here than Protestants. We've got Catholics and Jews, and then we've had a recent influx of many Muslims and Hindus. But the political name for this is pluralism. The theological name is polytheism. Uh, and society cannot function with many gods. And my argument was America at the founding was Christian and Protestant, and that construct allows us to make room for a certain number of minorities. The tree was Christian and Protestant. We had room in the branches for Roman Catholic and Jewish birds to nest in the branches, but it was in order to have this country the way it was established, we need to return to our roots. Okay, and that means returning to an evangelical form of Christianity, which is in America's DNA. Now, that's not the case. That's not the case since the close of World War II, because of anachronistic reinterpretations of American history. But Americans consider themselves to be a Christian people, a Christian nation, down to about the Second World War, about halfway through the 20th century. In 1892, there was a Supreme Court case exquisitely named Holy Trinity versus the United States of America. And Holy Trinity was the name of a church in New York. And Congress had passed a law saying that corporations or companies couldn't pay the passage of European workmen to come over, employ them on the job, and then release them into the country. They prohibited that. And a church in New York called a British minister, and they paid for his passage over. And some zealous prosecutor took it to court. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court decided it sensibly, common sensibly. They weren't talking about that. Of course, this guy can be a minister. They settled it that way. But then the chief justice, one of the justices, wrote the opinion. And in that opinion, he said, while we're on the subject, let's remind everybody that the United States is a Christian nation. Doesn't have an established state religion the way England or Denmark had, but it's a Christian nation. And he went back to the founding of the original colonies, the fundamental orders of Connecticut, and just walked through the history of the United States and proved conclusively that we were, in fact, a Christian nation. Now, I was born, I'm an old guy. I was born in 1953, okay? That decision was in 1892. The day I was born was closer to that court case than the day I was born was to today. Okay? I was closer to that court case on the day I was born than I was to my conversation with you today.
Wow,
It wasn't that long ago. And so the thing that I don't tire of telling people, when Americans considered ourselves to be a Christian nation, with the assumption, undergirding assumption that Jesus did in fact rise from the dead, it was not a totalitarian hellhole,
Mm-hmm.
right? I was just we were planting a church in Washington, D.C., and I was just there last Lord's Day and preached there, and we had a couple of protesters, red dressed handmaids outside, from the actual handmaids from the actual land of Gilead. So I went out and visited with them, and they indicated that things were bad in Gilead. But of course, the whole point of their protest was as though I and the people that agree with me wanted to do that to them. But that's never been the case in America's history at all, right?
So can I just really quick on that point? Does that mean that we just need to do a better job of saying what we're not saying?
Well, we do need to do a better job of that, but it's necessary for them to continue to maintain that is what we're saying, right? But it's a slander, basically. So I think we need to refute it, reject it. No, of course, I don't want to make all the women wear red dresses, and I don't want to treat them like they're procreative concubines. That good grief, that we didn't have any of that in our history. The America I want to go back to didn't contain any of that,
Right.
right? And so why when I want us to sort of refresh our roots, go back to our roots, what they want to do is scare people away. Oh, these people are Christo-fascists or theo-fascists or white supremacists. No.
Yeah, no, I just asked the question. I know we're right up against the end of the hour here, but I can't help but think, like, I guess maybe this is what you're saying is you've got the people on the fringe who really maybe just want to hate, like, and we know that hatred makes you dumb. Hatred makes you unable to think critically, and maybe like the shooter, for example, just like is convinced that Charlie Kirk is a fascist. He's going to engrave it on the bullet, and nothing that could be said would unconvince him of that because he wants to believe that, and his hatred has made him blind and dumb, right? But then is it the case? Would you agree that there's people in the middle who are actually like, hey, no, I just need you to do a better job of saying what you're not saying because I'm getting what you're actually saying distilled and distorted by other outlets and sources saying, oh, you hate compassion. Oh, wait, actually read the rest of the sentence, bro. So like, is it a matter of just fact checking the distorters of actual
the devil is a master of deception. So not only do you have people on the left misrepresenting us, slandering us by saying they want to do the Handmaid's Tale, but then we have on the right morons on the right who are say, yay, land of Gilead, we need it. And so there will be people that are self-described conservatives that lean into the slander and sort of adopt it as their own. And to them, I would say, thanks a lot, guys. You're not helping.
My last comment, and it's not leading into anything else, is just on that point that you just made. I'm so confused about where even the battle lines are drawn as I'm on TikTok and I'm seeing a lot of different accounts with a lot of views that are pro Schmittler. I don't know if we're allowed to say the actual name on YouTube, but we know who I'm talking about, the mustache man. And it's like, oh, who were you told was the villain of history that's actually the hero? And I'm looking and there's like hundreds of thousands of likes, tens of thousands of comments. And I'm like, but I'm looking at the account and it looks like a leftist account. And then I look at the next one and it looks like a right wing. And I'm like, I don't even know who are the players anymore. All I know is this is insane and people are extremely confused and everybody needs Jesus.
Yep. There you go.
Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you?
My blog is dougwils.com. And the name of the blog is Blog and Mayblog, DOUGWILS.com. And then pretty much everything I'm involved with is somewhere there on the front page. If you unfold the front page, New St. Andrews College, Canon Press, ACCS, Logos School, it's all there.
Fantastic, guys. Go check him out. Anybody listening to this right now, we have 224 people here live. Maybe you're the next person that's going to go to the campus, and maybe you're going to make an even better case for Christ than Charlie Kirk did. I hope that that's so. I hope that for like the seed, what is it? The blood of the martyrs becomes the seed of the church. That's what I'm hoping for.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wilson.
Thank you.